In the rioting in India today, at least 148 people are reported to have been killed and about 1,000 have been injured, as Hindus have taken revenge on Sikhs for the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi. Troops in New Delhi and Calcutta have been ordered to shoot rioters and looters on sight. There are curfews in 25 cities. Mrs. Thatcher will have armed guards with her when she goes to Delhi tomorrow for the funeral of Mrs. Gandhi on Saturday morning. Princess Anne will represent the Queen at the funeral and will then come home immediately, curtailing her tour because of doubts about security. The Foreign Office has revised its first advice and has warned British people not to travel to India. The authority of the new Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, is now said to be on trial. Besides New Delhi and Calcutta, the cities under curfew because of the riots include Benares, the Hindu holy city, Kanpur, Lucknow, capital of Uttar Pradesh, Patna, the Bihar capital, in central India, Indore and Jabalpur, Jammu in the far northwest, Agartala in the northeast. In Punjab, the state where most of India's 12 million Sikhs live, news is being censored to try to stop the killings.
This morning, 12 days of national mourning began for all India. From first light, crowds began to gather at the house where Mrs. Gandhi's body was to lie in state. It was once the home of her father, Pandit Nehru. Escorted by an army detail, the coffin was draped in the national colours of India, green, white and saffron. Some of the crowd chanted, "Indira, blood for blood." They carried the coffin in. It was a symbolic end to her 17-year rule of India. Among the chief mourners this morning, her son, suddenly the leader of 730 million people. All day, TV and radio have carried his appeals for people not to let their grief turn to anger. Outside, some of the mourners couldn't contain their grief. But even as the Sikh president of India, Zail Singh, laid the first official wreath on the body, outside, the mobs had taken to the streets. From many parts of the country, and despite the presence of large numbers of police, there have been scores of clashes. Here in the capital, Delhi, we saw dozens of instances like this. Mobs of angry Hindus attacking Sikh businesses, looking for Sikh people, and burning Sikh cars. Reports of violence and deaths have been coming in from many parts of the country. And despite the presence of large numbers of police, there have been scores of clashes in the capital, as Hindus continued their revenge against the Sikhs. Sikhs drive most of the taxis in Delhi, and they were a major target for the mobs today. Sikh temples also came under attack. At the main temple in the center of the city, a Hindu mob threw stones and tried but failed to get into the building. Tonight, as a partial curfew was imposed, many Sikhs and police were on the streets guarding their property and their homes, but saying they were prepared to fight.
We don't want any protection from the police. If they allow us, we will see them.
You mean you'll deal with it?
Yes, we will deal. We are not coward people, no?
Tonight, the situation appears a lot more calm, but that's because a partial curfew has removed many of the mobs from the streets. Nevertheless, we've passed scores of vehicles like this within the last half an hour, and much depends now on whether the TV and radio appeals for calm that are going out constantly here are in fact being heeded by both communities.
In India, a day of mourning has turned into a day of violence after the assassination of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. The latest report tonight says that at least 110 people have been killed in the fury that swept the country. Hundreds more have been injured. Cities are under curfew and troops in the capital Delhi have been ordered to shoot looters and arsonists on sight. In one incident, 12 people were dragged from a train and clubbed to death. The Foreign Office in London say Britain's planning to go to India in the next few days should stay away. Princess Anne, who's to represent the Queen at Mrs. Gandhi's funeral on Saturday, has been advised by the Indian government to return home immediately afterwards, instead of carrying on with her Save the Children plans. Armed bodyguards will accompany Mrs. Thatcher when she flies to India tomorrow, and opposition leaders will also be guarded by special branch men. The main target of today's violence has been the Sikh community because the gunmen who killed Mrs. Gandhi were Sikhs. But in spite of the hostility and bloodshed, a Sikh soldier took his turn guarding the body of the dead Prime Minister as she lay in state. The capital has seen the worst of the violence. 16 people died there. Tonight it's reported to be quiet. In Kanpur, troops were called out to control the mobs. In Calcutta, the police opened fire, then the army had to go in to help. It was a similar story in cities all over the country. From Delhi, Brian Hanrahan reports.
The Hindu backlash turned what should have been a day of mourning into a day of revenge. Hardly a part of Delhi was spared the attacks on the Sikhs. The elegant colonnades of Connaught Centre were put to the torch as part of a frenzy that started early and spread right across the city to rich and poor areas alike. Burning vehicles by the dozen littered the roads and pavements. Heavy black smoke puffed upwards with each exploding petrol tank. Particular targets were the taxis, mostly driven by Sikhs. They were stopped, smashed and set on fire. Few drivers were willing to risk their lives. Nearly all traffic stopped. The few policemen in sight watched without attempting to interfere. They said the violence was so widespread it was impossible to cope with it. Parts of Delhi became lawless. At their temples, the Sikhs gathered with swords and homemade cudgels, ready to defend themselves. The targets of the violence were undoubtedly Sikhs, their shops, their offices and their vehicles. A similar pattern of violence against Sikhs is becoming apparent across central and northern India, the areas they call the Hindu heartland. Eventually in Delhi this evening, the army were brought in to try to restore order. They've had to be called out in 6 cities now. Curfews have been declared in 16. While all this was happening, Mrs. Gandhi's body was taken on a gun carriage from her house where it had remained overnight. It will lie in state for 2 days in the mansion used by her father, Pandit Nehru, while he was India's Prime Minister. Her son, Rajiv, now Prime Minister in her place, took his stance as tradition demanded alongside the body. He greeted the President of India, other officials and members of the family who came to see Mrs. Gandhi's embalmed body. While the mighty file passed inside, many thousands passed in front of the open door outside. Theirs was a noisy and an angry procession, shouting and surging. Their slogan, Mrs. Gandhi's memory will live on. And there to watch and sometimes greet them was the new Prime Minister, who has to ride that anger and turn it away from communal violence. Rajiv Gandhi, the third of his family to rule India, must now prove his own worth. His likely first step is to call an election and hope that this outpouring of national anger and grief can be turned into a vote in support of him. Then, with a popular mandate, he'll be able to turn his attentions to tackling India's problems, the problems his mother has bequeathed him. It was noticeable that nowhere in that long line of people were there any turbans. No Sikh felt his grief was deep enough to risk appearing in the midst of a volatile crowd that seemed constantly close to violence. Outside the grounds, the line wound on, many thousands strong, and tens of thousands flooded through the broad avenues to join the queue, to show respect and grief and anger. A funeral pyre is being prepared for Mrs. Gandhi's cremation after a state funeral on Saturday. More than 100 nations have announced that they will be represented. Guarding them will be a further strain on security forces already overstretched.
First, more than 100 people are thought to have died in communal violence across India in the wake of Mrs. Gandhi's assassination by 2 Sikh members of her bodyguard. In widespread rioting, Hindus are attacking Sikh property, Sikh temples, and Sikhs themselves. The picture is still confused, but in Delhi, where a 24-hour curfew has been imposed and the troops have been called out to try to restore order, it's reported that security forces now have orders to shoot to kill. Outside Delhi, curfews have been imposed in 30 other cities, including the holy city of Benares, the Kashmiri summer capital of Jammu, the state capital of Bihar, Putna, and the state capital of Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow. In the Punjab, there are reports that the family and friends of one of the assassins have been arrested. And in Calcutta, as in Delhi, the troops have been called out to try to restore order. Edward Sturton, in London, has been following the day's events.
Despite the 24-hour curfew, Delhi at nightfall bore the scars of a day of violence on the streets. Anti-Sikh feeling had made itself felt across the country. The day began with the moving of Mrs. Gandhi's body, carried in a gun carriage, to the home of her father, Pandit Nehru. She'll lie in state there until her funeral on Saturday. Thousands of people had gathered to see her at the gates of what has become a shrine to the Gandhi family. So many came to pay their respects to the Prime Minister but the security forces hustled them past her body as quickly as possible. One mourner said the whole nation had been orphaned. Mrs. Gandhi's son Rajiv, the new Prime Minister, appealed for calm. But nothing could still the grief of some. By the time the day was over, some 400,000 had been through, and the press was so great that police had to hold together the hastily erected barriers. 40 people were injured in the crush. They chanted Mrs. Gandhi's name, and some cried for vengeance. Anti-Sikh feeling was expressed in more than words on the streets. Hundreds of cars and Sikh shops were burnt. Many Sikhs are shopkeepers, which makes them easy targets. But there are no Sikh ghettos as such, and for the most part they live cheek by jowl with the other religious groups. So gangs, sometimes as many as 2,000 strong, roamed the streets. And before long, much of the city was under a pall of smoke. Some Sikhs took refuge in one of Delhi's Sikh temples. A crowd surrounded the building and tried to drive them out. It's not clear how much of the violence was straightforward vandalism and looting, and how much was genuine communal anger. The army were brought onto the streets in force. In Delhi, they've been given orders to shoot rioters and arsonists on sight, and 30 of India's cities have been put under curfew. New Delhi's police chief called the trouble the worst since independence. This evening, the national flag flew at half-mast on India's parliament. The nation is in mourning for its leader. It's also holding its breath to see how long the violence will continue.
Calcutta, there were curfews in a further 9 towns after arson and looting. Mrs. Gandhi was shot by 2 Sikh members of her staff, and the violence has flared as the Hindus take out their revenge on Sikhs throughout India. The new Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, has appealed for calm as the country begins 12 days of mourning. Ken Rees reports from New Delhi.
From first light, crowds began to gather at the house where Mrs. Gandhi's body was to lie in state. It was once the home of her father, Pandit Nehru. Escorted by an army detail, it arrived just after 7 o'clock, marking a symbolic end to her 17-year rule of India and the beginning of 12 days of official state mourning. Among the first to arrive was the new Prime Minister, her son, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. Sworn in only yesterday, he's not slept since his mother's death, working through the night with his aides trying to keep the country under control, with violence breaking out in many states. Many of the mourners were clearly overwhelmed with grief. Mr. Gandhi appealed time and time again for calm. Some were so eager to reach the coffin that they broke through the hastily erected barriers. They were chanting, "Indira's name will live forever," and, more somberly, "Blood for blood." Despite TV and radio appeals for the nation to remain calm, there have been reports of violence and deaths coming in from many parts of the country. And despite the presence of large numbers of police, there have been scores of clashes in the capital as Hindus took revenge against Sikhs and their property. Most Sikhs are staying off the streets, hoping that the situation will calm down. At one of the Sikh temples in Delhi, a Hindu mob threw stones and tried but failed to reach the building, which is heavily defended by Sikhs. They did manage to set fire to some buildings in the grounds. Mr. Gandhi has called in Indian Army units to try and control the situation. And in the old part of Delhi, where the very poorest Hindus and Sikhs live, the army has been battling with rioters. But as we found, police elsewhere in the city seem to prefer to stand by. Just 50 yards from police lines here, Hindu youths began stoning a Sikh building. Already people's grief is turning to anger. Here we've got a mob of Hindus attacking a Sikh premises in the middle of Delhi. The police are nowhere to be seen. And this sort of situation is expected to get worse, indeed to be repeated across the country, particularly after her funeral on Saturday. Ken Rees, ITN, Delhi.